Notre Dame fans, welcome to a special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, and I will be joined here in a little bit by John Garcia, who is from SI All-American, but we are here tonight to cover the commitment of Drayk Bowen. He is getting ready to talk now, so we're just going to go ahead and jump right into that. Let me just turn the sound on. I need everybody to let me know if you can hear him as soon as I put him in there.
It started out kind of slow. I got my first offer in
everybody hear me?
summer going into my sophomore year. And then kind of in December is when it just took off. Pretty much an offer every other week, talking to coaches. So at one point I was talking to 27 different coaches in a week. So it was pretty busy, pretty time consuming, but it was pretty fun once I got used to it.
Who's helped you throughout this process?
So my parents have definitely helped me, and then I would say Coach Henry Johnson and Coach Joey Johnson have helped me a lot with how to handle different situations, who to talk to and when to talk to them. But my family's probably helped me the most with, just kind of how overwhelmed I was and kind of how to time management everything.
Certainly a lot of pressure when you are getting a lot of calls, a lot of coaches coming after you. What kind of player is a prospective school getting out of you, Drayk?
So I would say I'm a Luke Kuechly, Bobby Wagner hybrid. I watch a ton of film. So that's one thing I admired about Luke Kuechly was that he watched a ton of film and kind of knew what was happening before it happened. And then with Bobby Wagner, how physical he is. I like to be physical on the field. So that's one trait I admired out of him.
Great stuff there. Two great players. Drayk, sit tight. We'll get to your announcement in a moment here on CBS Sports HQ. All right, so here's a look at the top linebackers in the class of 2023. Drayk Bowen, again, the number 2 linebacker in the 2023.
And per usual, CBS Sports is going to take 15 minutes to drag this out and get as much out of this as possible. So we're going to put his whatever that guy's talking about off to the side here, and whoever he's going to talk to next. When Drayk comes back, we will go back to that announcement. So this is obviously a potentially a big night for Notre Dame. This is a situation where you've got an in-state kid that's not your typical in-state kid. He does have Southern ties. We're going to get into the backstory of how this recruitment went down. It didn't go the way I think a lot of people think it went. So we'll kind of we'll kind of dive into to those conversations here in a little bit, but this is one that I think Notre Dame has to win, and it's obvious. In-state kid, 5-star kid, but I also think a commitment from a player like Drayk Bowen could be one of those things that starts a bit of a roll. Notre Dame is already off to such a great start in the 2023 class. He's a guy that could add to that. Obviously, we'll get into the rankings and those type of things here in a little bit, but you need to go beat these kids. I mean, Notre Dame doesn't get 5-star kids to be in state very often. And when they get that kind of player, we could nitpick whether he's a 5-star top 50 guy. He's definitely a legit top 50 guy, but he's a kid that has a ton of talent, athletic player. And here's the thing, whoever he picks tonight, and we'll find out here soon enough, you guys will know soon enough. But whoever he picks tonight, the football teams isn't the only one that is getting a big pickup here. It's also he's a really good baseball player. He's a legitimate 2-sport star baseball player as well. And baseball had a huge impact in his decision. And we'll talk a little bit more about that once he makes his decision, because if I start getting too much into it, it's going to kind of give away his decision a little bit. But this is a kid that I think would fit all 3 of these defenses extremely well. He's an athletic kid, very raw player. We'll dive into the film when John gets up here with us a little bit as well. But he's a lot more raw, I think, than maybe your typical top 25 to 50 player from a fundamental standpoint. Part of that is because he plays 2 sports. He's not a kid that's necessarily played a ton of football only, going to 7-on-7s. A lot of times when other people are going to 7-on-7s, he's at a baseball tournament, because as I said, he's a really good baseball player. So here we go. Let's get Drayk back. Are they seriously going to go to a commercial? You got to be kidding me. I got to talk to my boy John Garcia. If we ever start having anything like this with SL American, he better not have these kind of commercials and drag these announcements out for 20 minutes. But hey, you gotta make your money. So we'll get John here very soon. But this is going to be an interesting one. So this is part. So just a little bit into what Notre Dame's needs are at linebacker in the 2022 class or 23 class. Because you signed 4 players, because you signed 4 players in the 2022 class, Notre Dame needed an infusion of numbers and talent. And the 2022 class certainly did that. Plus, you have Prince Colley in the 2021 class. What you've done is you've put yourself in a situation with the 2023 class where, yes, you need at least 2 linebackers. I think they'd take a third if it's the right player and if it's a guy that brings some versatility, like perhaps a Tamir Robinson, who could be a rover, maybe an inside linebacker, that kind of guy. But what it allowed Marcus Freeman to do was, once you got Jalen Sneed with the rest of the 3-man class they had, it allowed you to focus on elite players in 2023. So you didn't have to focus on numbers. You could just focus on the impact players. And they settled in very, very early on the 2 kids, Drayk Bowen and Sonny Styles, as their top 2 players. And I mean, that's kind of where their focus has been. Now they've recruited other players because, as I said, they may take a third. Just depends on how the numbers shake out. We'll have a better idea here over the next 3-4 months as Notre Dame players start making decisions about who's going to come back and those type of things. But we'll here we go. Let's see if we can get back to it now.
The stage is yours. Where will you be playing college football in 2023?
So first off, I want to thank, God for allowing me these gifts that I've been given to be able to play at such a high level. I want to thank my family and friends who have supported me throughout this entire process. I want to thank Coach Henry Johnson, who has helped me get my name out there and, help me develop my use of social media. I want to thank Coach Joey Johnson, who couldn't be here, he lives in North Carolina, but he's given me so much advice throughout this recruiting process. I want to thank Coach DT, who's helped me with my film breakdown and with my workouts, helped me develop on the mental and physical side of football. I want to thank, my Uncle Mike for my mental development through his mental coaching. I want to thank Mr. Segura, who's traveled with me throughout the South in the summer and who's been a mentor to me. I want to thank all the youth organizations from Coach Arvanitis and Coach Barnes at Tri-Town to Coach Aaron at the Tigers organization, then to Andrew and the coaching staff there for giving me a chance to play early. And then with baseball, I want to thank the Shockers organization, Coach Bobby Morris and the Morris organization, and lastly, the Indiana Bulls, who have developed me and helped me get on the recruiting trail. With that being said, also I want to tell little kids that, that there's always a way out. Don't let anybody tell you can't do anything. You can dream, you can achieve it. With that being said, I'll be committing to the University of Notre Dame.
And there it is.
Drayk, congratulations. What a moment for you committing to Notre Dame. You're staying in the state of Indiana, about an hour away from South Bend. What was it about Notre Dame that stood out to you over the other schools?
So really, I had great relationships with Coach Freeman and Coach Bowden, and then Coach Jarrett and Coach Wallace. But the main reason was that being gone during summer for so long, I had seen my brother and sister had gotten closer, and I just didn't get to see them growing up. So that was a huge reason why I wanted to stay close to home and be able to see them grow up.
And you're going to play baseball as well at Notre Dame.
Yes, sir.
That's fantastic. Double sport athlete right there. Drayk, congrats on your decision. Before I let you go, tell all the Fighting Irish fans what type of player they're going to be getting once you step foot on campus.
So they're going to be getting a hard worker in and out of the classroom. I'm gonna try and bring Notre Dame to that standard that it always has of national championships. I'm going to try and help Coach Bowden and Coach Freeman bring in those best recruits on defense. So I really want to put Notre Dame over the edge and make this a national championship program.
Drayk, great stuff.
All right, so there you have it, Notre Dame fans. Drayk Bowen is a Fighting Irish commit in the 2023 class. Joining me is John Garcia, the Director of Recruiting at SI All-American. And John, let's just kind of start off. What kind of commitment, what kind of pickup is this for Notre Dame?
BD, this is a statement pickup. I mean, this is one of the top players in America for 2023, but it's also an in-state kid, right? So this is kind of a reminder, a flag-bearing reminder, hey, this is still Notre Dame territory. We know how hotly contested recruiting is in the Midwest in general. The state of Indiana has gotten a lot better over the years in terms of producing talent. So you got to keep that talent home if you're Notre Dame, especially when it's a two-sport athlete, especially when it's a national recruitment. That puts more emphasis on keeping him home because there is a true national footprint. And when you beat the SEC and the ACC power, Clemson, for anybody at any recruitment, any position, I don't care if it's a punter, it's a very big deal. And it is a statement for not only where your program is right now, but the sustainability of that program over time. And to do it at a position everybody needs versatile athletic linebackers, it says even more about the Irish. So huge win for Brian Kelly and company. Obviously, Marcus Freeman, another feather in his cap. And this is a kid that's really fun to watch. So I'm excited to see how he matures.
John, talk about, if you will, Notre Dame is trying to get into that situation, and we've seen it a little bit with the 2022 class. SI All-American has it ranked 4th. I think you have like 6 Notre Dame players in the top 100. Talk about how important it is for Notre Dame to get kids like this in order to get more kids like this. How does getting Keon Keeley, then Brennan Vernon, and now Drayk Bowen, how does that impact going after the next group, Sonny Styles, Malik Muhammad, A.J. Harris, Caleb Downs, those guys? What does it do for your ability? Because he talked about it. He wants to bring in new guys. But, hey, if a 3-star kid from, the middle of Indiana that nobody's ever heard of picks Notre Dame, that phone call is going to sound a little bit different. Am I wrong on that?
Not at all. These kids know each other. Peer recruiting, really the pandemic put a bigger emphasis on peer recruiting than maybe all of us anticipated. We saw prospects committed to one school creating visit weekends on their own. So I think the group chats with technology, the way these kids communicate, and there's obviously no rules against it. I mean, it's more important now to have earlier big name national recruits on your commitment list because other kids see it. And particularly on defense, where we know it's a little easier to maybe pull the trigger with that offer a little bit sooner, it makes that much more sense of importance because you have to get in early with the top kids, like some of those guys you mentioned, and Notre Dame's done a really good job with that. And it would say a lot against Notre Dame if they were assembling this great national class and the best player in their state was headed elsewhere. That would create kind of an unnecessary bump in what happened here if he didn't go to Notre Dame. So, I mean, there's a lot of ripples and ramifications if you don't get a kid like this. But when you do, you're just clearing a path to the benefit of the doubt, which is what I always talk about with players, with coaches, with programs, perception. It's so important in recruiting, Brian. It just creates more benefit of the doubt when the best kid in your state is playing for your school. It's simple as that.
I think that last thing you said, John, is huge because if you lose a 5-star kid from an hour away from your campus to a Southern school, it sends shockwaves, in my opinion. This was huge. And I'm going to give a little backstory here too. John, you know a lot of this. We've chatted a lot about this. There's been this thought process that, well, he's from an hour away. Of course he's going to go to Notre Dame. Let me tell y'all, this was far from a done deal for a long time. Drayk is not your typical Indiana kid in that he was born and raised in Indiana. He is a Southern kid. His family's from Texas. His dad is a big Texas Longhorn fan. Dad didn't push him to Texas, but let's just say they were very open to going to Southern schools. And for much of his recruitment, my sources that I talked to that weren't just on the Notre Dame side, but were on the other side, I'll be honest with you. I thought it was going to be a Clemson or Auburn deal for a while. And if Alabama got involved, they would be. But Clemson, to me, for a long time, football-wise, was hard after Drayk. And then Auburn did a phenomenal job selling the baseball program. And when you can kind of throw names out like, I don't know, Bo Jackson, Frank Thomas as two sports stars in football and baseball, that was a great pitch. And Notre Dame had to battle back to get him because of the fact he's not your typical Northern Indiana, grew up a Notre Dame fan. So Marcus Freeman and his staff did a tremendous job. Let me explain something else. The job Link Jarrett has done with the baseball team the last 2 years, not just on the field, but they've got 5 top 100 commits in their I believe it's the 2022 class. I went back and looked at the whoever that company is that kind of does top hundreds. They hadn't gotten more than 1 or 2 top 100 kids in a year. So what he's done in a short period of time at Notre Dame has made Notre Dame a far more attractive baseball option now than it was a year and a half ago. So that played a big factor in it too. So this was not your typical Northern Indiana, of course, Drew Tranquil is going to go to Notre Dame when they offer kind of situation, John. They had to battle for this one.
For sure. I was actually recently on the phone with a source, one of my Auburn sources, and yeah, it was about the baseball program. You know, football speaks for itself for the most part there at Auburn, especially SEC linebacker. I mean, Auburn's had as good a run at that position as many of the top schools in the country. But I think the Auburn approach and how much ground they actually had in this recruitment says a lot about the kid as well.
Mm-hmm.
Baseball wasn't viewed as, oh yeah, I'm going to play some baseball too. Baseball was viewed, I would say, almost in equal footing as football was. We all know this is a football first deal. This podcast, the kids' recruitment, the reason it was on CBS, it's a football first deal. But baseball is not such a secondary, just throw it away, I'm here to have fun kind of thing. As you mentioned before he popped, you know, summer baseball is so brutal. I mean, you're traveling all off season. You're missing on the 7-on-7 circuit. You're missing on visits for football. So many different things that pull you away from it. And so it kind of tells you which kids are serious, because we see 3 sport athletes all the time who put sports 2 and 3 to the side when it comes to that primary sport, whether it's recruiting, practice, whatever it is. You know, Drew wasn't one of those kids. You know, he wanted to get out through those baseball visits. And again, I heard the same thing you did. That Auburn baseball angle was kind of an X factor in this recruitment. So for Notre Dame to reel him in despite that, and despite the obstacles that you've talked about, I think says a lot about the program. And again, can't emphasize enough how good it is to get an elite national recruit this early. The 2022 class doesn't sign till next month, and you've already started to assemble a brilliant early 2023 class, especially in that defensive front 7.
And we're going to get to that for sure. That's definitely on the topic of conversation list. We have a super chat here from Tommy Guns. Also have a super chat here from Paul Olmstead. Thank you for that, Paul. Any chance Notre Dame would have gotten Drake without Freeman? I don't want to say they wouldn't have. I don't know. Clark Lee, this is the kind of kid I think Clark Lee would have done okay with. But let's be honest, Clark Lee so far has identified and landed every single linebacker that he's wanted. You know, he prioritized Jalen Sneed as soon as he got here. He offered, because if you think about it, when he was hired in January of this past year, John, Josh Burnham was considered a strong lean to Michigan, where the team he grew up rooting for. And Jalen Sneed and Junior Tuihalamaka didn't even have Notre Dame offers at that time. And so and Junior Tuihalamaka was committed to USC at the time. So he was able to get the 3 guys that he wanted. They passed on Sebastian Cheeks because they wanted the 3 guys that they got. And in 2023, Drayk Bowen and Sonny Styles are the 2 guys that they have prioritized above all others. And so far, that's 1 down, now 1 to go. Because when you land the kind of linebacker class that Notre Dame did in 2022, which came a year after they got Prince Collie, who SI All-American, I believe, had as the number 49 player in the country in the 2021 class. You're in a position now, John, where if you're not getting an elite guy, you've got to put him on the back burner, and you got to shoot for elite guys. And so far, that's what Notre Dame is doing, not just at linebacker, but as you mentioned, Keon Keeley, Brandon Vernon. They're putting together something special so far in that 2023 class.
And with Drake, him committing early and being a take this early also says a lot about Notre Dame. You know, if he is the kid, as you mentioned, kind of the stereotypical Indiana kid who you can just kind of offer at the last minute, why take him now? You know, we don't know what the roster numbers look like. You don't know how the class of 2022 is going to finish. you don't know how the rest of 2023 is going to go over the next few months through the coaching carousel that's going to happen, all this stuff. You don't take that kid this early unless he's a no-brainer, green light, home run kind of kid. So I think that reemphasizes it and takes a bit of that Indiana stereotype away in terms of what Drayk Bowen can do on the football field. I think that priority level where he sits on the board, very evident by the timing of all of this. I mean, we're in early November of 2021 talking about a kid who's going to enroll, I assume in January or in the spring of 2023. So that's big,
the one thing that'll be interesting. There's some academic work that still needs to get done. My understanding is the goal is to enroll early and then play baseball right away. So yep. That would be a goal. Now, again, there's some, as with all these kids, when they're only first semester juniors, there's a lot of academic hurdles that you have to get over in order to be able to enroll early. But that is the plan as of right now for Drayk and his family. Notre Dame got on him early too, John, and I think that was important. They offered him in February. Clemson offered in June, and I believe Auburn offered in May, or vice versa, but they offered more in the summer. Getting on him early, I think, and identifying his talent early is also a credit to the Notre Dame staff. Because, again, this is not your typical Indiana kid that Notre Dame can get in on 4 months after the Clemson and Auburn and still land. Identifying him early, even while he was still – Marcus Freeman and his staff were still identifying who they wanted in the 2022 class. Like I said, he got offered a month after they offered Jalen Sneed and Junior Tuihalamaka. You had to start building that relationship while you were also building the Josh Burnham, Junior Tuihalamaka, Jalen Sneed relationship.
And when you talk about looking at how teams recruit nationally, if there's a team stingier than Clemson with underclassmen offers, point them out because – we don't really see Clemson diving in early on prospects outside of the Arch Mannings of the world, the no-brainer offensive face of the program kind of recruits. That defensive class that they are targeting at Clemson has probably 15 or so. So to be one of those 15 or so already with that firm scholarship offer, that green light to commit scholarship offer, again, using your context clues with schools around the country, reemphasizes just the type of athlete that Drayk is, not only in football, but again, like you said, in baseball. And that's something that I think you can't say enough about. And it's a good thing for any Notre Dame fans on here saying, like, I wish he would just focus on football. I mean, I hope that perception is gone because all of the data suggests that not specializing in a sport, even at the high school level, is such a big deal. Heck, on the football field, he doesn't even specialize at linebacker. I mean, this kid is a big-time running back
all over.
who's playing, playoff football here in the next few weeks. So we don't value those kids who specialize more than those who don't. If anything, it's the opposite because we know there's so much more room to improve once the kid, as a young man, can focus on one sport and one position. We know that the ceiling can be much closer to being attainable.
Well, fans should also get very cautious about asking Drayk to pick one sport right now as well, because as of right now, it's not a given that it would be football. I mean, that's the other thing, depending on where he gets drafted here in the next year or two. So, John, something else about this recruitment too is you mentioned selectiveness of Clemson. They never offered Jalen Sneed, who's in their backyard, yet they offered Drayk Bowen. Again, I think that speaks to, and I'll tell you something else. There's a lot of, I don't know if you've heard this, John, but I've heard this from several people. There's a lot of schools that did not offer him because they assumed he was going to go to Notre Dame. I've been told that about several big schools that never got into the recruitment because they didn't know what we knew about him not being that kind of guy. So when they finally decided to get in, when they heard that he wasn't a lock to Notre Dame, it was too little too late because he had already kind of narrowed down the schools. But this is a big pickup for Notre Dame. Let's dive into the film a little bit, John, and I want you to kind of, you and I can share with people about what we see from Drayk Bowen that stands out. And I think the first thing that's going to jump out at people, John, is this is a explosive but also a very powerful young man.
This is a ferocious athlete. I don't even know if he's a linebacker today in terms of the projectable sense. Obviously, his height, weight, and striking ability would suggest he plays there. But this is just an athlete, a see ball, get ball, raw torque talent who really closes extremely well. Just because he's raw doesn't mean he's undisciplined or loose.
Mhm.
I think he does play with a striking control with that short area
Mhm.
explosiveness. Not asked to do a whole lot in the passing game, because why would you? You want this kid chasing ball carriers, chasing quarterbacks. Simple zone drops are a part of it, but really it's about reading and reacting, which is, again, just fine when you're talking about sophomore, early junior season tape. All the polish, fitting the gaps in, right shoulder, and all that kind of stuff will come with time and with that singular positional focus, which, again, we can't emphasize enough, Drayk does not have at this moment.
Yeah, I think the thing for me is what I like in young athletes is I like that natural power. I like that functional power. Those guys that can just step and explode, step with power. He doesn't need, I mean, look, any decent football player can get a 10-yard head start and drill somebody, right? This is a young man that can take 2 steps and arrive at a blocker with power. I mean, there's things he does. When we talk about raw, it's not about he doesn't know how to play football. It's just there's a lot of technical things that because he's so much better than everybody else, he just gets away with certain things that maybe you can't get away with if you're a lesser player and a lesser talent. There's a play, for example, you break down the film against Nolan Ziegler's high school. And of course, I broke that down because that was a phenomenal game from Nolan Ziegler, who outplayed Drayk Bowen on that game. But the thing you see from Drayk in that game was he would arrive at blockers and just easily engage and dismantle like it was nothing. I mean, he's just got that natural, and that's a lot of that comes from baseball. I mean, baseball players usually have, especially hitters, have very strong wrists and very strong hands. And you see that on the football field. I mean, his ability to strike and dismantle, as his technique improves, his overall effectiveness is going to improve. But this is a young man that can play. He can play to the sideline. He can drop in coverage athletically. A lot to learn about how to actually drop into coverage. And that's where not being a big 7-on-7 circuit guy is going to, he'll need some time to develop there. But honestly, if I'm on third down, I don't want Drayk Bowen dropping into coverage. I want Drayk Bowen getting after the quarterback. Let's let Jalen Sneed and Josh Burnham drop back into coverage. Let Nolan Ziegler drop back into coverage. Stick Drayk Bowen on the quarterback, because flying downhill is what this young man does best.
Exactly. And that's what we talk about with the raw pedigree today. Again, so early. A lot of this tape is 2020, early 2021 stuff. And this is what I love. Give me linebackers who play running back. I know I talked about it ad nauseum with you, with Prince Collie. This is what I love, because it creates not only an understanding of what your opposition is going to do when you're projected at linebacker, but the vision, the feel, watching those zone blocking schemes and seeing the holes develop, seeing them before they're there. There's no substitute for that. I like receivers who play DB, linebackers who play running back,
backs who shove kids heads into the ground on this stiff arm. Watch this. Bam.
And I think it says a lot about his overall athleticism, his conditioning. We don't. When you and I were in the game, a lot of great high school players played both ways. I didn't come off the field in high school, and I was not a great college player. We don't see a lot of two-way guys anymore. Even your Travis Hunter's #1 player in the country, he moonlights at that secondary position, which is in the secondary. It's not the case for Drayk. This is a 15 totes a game running back who's definitely not coming off the field on defense. So I think it says a lot about his overall conditioning, athleticism, all the stuff that translates over from baseball as well. Just the hand-eye coordination, the body control. You talk about a baseball trait not talked about enough. The body control, understanding left and right side. When you're a right-handed hitter, you have to hit the other way sometimes in practice to balance off your side. So it creates an understanding of your ability to isolate parts of your body, which again, at linebacker would really translate at the next level and will help him develop those coverage skills once he can actually focus on them. So there's so much to like with the two-sport and the two-way ability that we see with Drayk that we could really kind of go on and on about it. But he's a football player, he's an athlete, and he's just an explosive one. He can really run too, and we haven't really talked about that. He can really run when he knows where he needs to go. Like I said, see ball, get ball, even if ball is far away.
And that's the thing, the raw part will come. There are times when you don't necessarily see him play with that same explosiveness snap after snap. So like you look at a guy like Drew Tranquil. I like the Drew Tranquil comp, and it's not because they're both from Northern Indiana or that they kind of look alike. The reason I like the Drew Tranquil comp is because I think their body types are very similar. Although I would say that Drake is kind of now as a junior in high school where Drew was as a sophomore at Notre Dame. Drew filled out as he got older. But I think that easy athleticism is the other thing about Drew Tranquil. Drew Tranquil was an underrated athlete because he didn't look explosive. He could just kind of run. And I think Drake looks real explosive in those short area things. When he's just running, he doesn't necessarily look like Jalen Snead. But then you watch the ground that he covers and the force of which he arrives. Like, wow, this kid can really run. And I think body type wise, he's not Sonny Styles, 6'5", 220, 225. He doesn't have Josh Burnham's just pterodactyl arms. But he's got plenty of size to play that position. Another thing too, John, you and I have talked a lot about in the past on the show and off the air. It's ideal on defense nowadays to find guys that aren't stuck at one position. I don't know if I see Drake as a rover, but I think he can play Mike. I think he can play Will. I think he can walk up off the edge and rush the quarterback. And I think if they're going to play a 3-3 down the road, he is a guy that could play sort of that hybrid position that moves around. So I think that's the other thing for me is this is a young man that can fit into this defense in a lot of different ways. And that's so important in today's game.
Yeah, I see versatility as well, Brian. I think, when I think quick trigger athlete who can kind of chase you down, I naturally go to that old school Will linebacker who can help you out in coverage, but he could also come backside and eliminate all of those cutback lanes. Like you said, he's not the biggest kid in the world in terms of his height and his weight. So I think he can stay in that range and be one of these 6'2", 235-pound modern linebackers to play off the football. But on third down, I'm either walking him up on the edge or even allowing him to pick his spots as an interior blitzer. I think that's in the evaluation game. We don't talk about that enough. That feel, that natural ability for timing up a blitz and screaming downhill. It's like playing up a strength that he already shows so much as a high school prospect on tape. So I'd have him attacking downhill as much as humanly possible until he fills out that technical skill set. But yeah, I think he can play off-ball backer, and depending on how his body fills out and how that tech comes in, I think you could see him, being the attack guy from a bunch set or something like that, working outside in. There's not a lot of imagination to imagine that.
Yeah, the only thing that's going to keep you from being able to move him around is your own lack of imagination. And I think we've seen it at Notre Dame. Sometimes I wish Marcus Freeman had less imagination, like just leave Isaiah Foskey at Viper, okay? You don't need to move him around. But this is the kind of athlete, and we look at the 2022 class, John, obviously at 247, I think, has all of their linebackers in the top 250. I know that SI All-American has 2 of Notre Dame's linebackers in the top 100. In Josh Burnham and Jalen Snead. They're all very talented players. I'm very high on Nolan Ziegler. I mean, again, we watched him outplay Drayk Bowen. Nolan's a year ahead of Drake, but I love the athleticism that in a very short period of time that Marcus Freeman has been able to add, because that's the one thing you and I talk about when we talk about Nolan Ziegler. We talk about Burnham. We talk about Snead. We talk about Drayk Bowen. We talk about guys who can just flat out run, and they've got length. I think those two things is something that I think Notre Dame's got good athletes at linebacker now. They don't have the length, and they don't have just the pure explosiveness of what we've seen. So that's the thing I think that should have Notre Dame fans most excited, is the kind of just elite athlete that Marcus Freeman has been able to get, and he's not even been here a year yet.
That's crazy. That's crazy to think about because we hear him so much. I mean, you heard Drake there mentioning him as part of the reason why he made his verbal commitment. And look, at that position, we talk about it there. We talk about it on the defensive front as well. I mean, heck, we talk about it in the secondary with Notre Dame. Just bring in athletes. Don't worry about – I mean, I would imagine Marcus Freeman's not, drawing up his board like remember in Friday Night Lights, Billy Bob Thornton has like his board. Like, they're not doing that with recruits at Notre Dame. It's just linebacker. Yeah. And just fill – how many spots do we have? Okay, let me get the 3 best guys that I can get at that position. And you figure it out from there. I think we see it a lot with schools on the offensive line now. Brian, I'm not recruiting centers, guards, and tackles. I'm recruiting the best lineman I can get. And if I need a center, it's one guy who I'm going to talk to him about it and say,
that's how Harry Heastan recruited. I mean, almost everyone that Harry Heastan recruited played tackle in high school. I mean, the only one that didn't was Tristan Hodge, and he was one of the few guys that didn't pan out. You know, like even Sam Mustapher, who was 6'2.5", he played left tackle at Good Counsel in high school. And so,
Right.
and I think that's the modern game though, right? Like the era of, okay, you've got to get your short, stocky, stout, you know, tackle to tackle thumper. I still think there's a need for that in situations, which is why I'm so high on Junior Tuihalamaka in this class. But for the most part, what you need is the middle linebacker of today is not Manti Te'o, right? And it wasn't that long ago, but the game has changed, right? You can have a 225, 230 pound guy. It's like Jonathan Vilma was so far ahead of his time, but like that's the prototype middle linebacker. Ideally, maybe a little bit more length, but that guy that can just flat out run. You can have a Mike like that. You can have a Will like that. And most teams are doing things schematically with their Mike and their Will where they're you could play. I mean, they're interchangeable. And that's the thing, is just get the best guys you can get and we'll figure it out. And that's what Notre Dame has done. I mean, you look, even Junior Tuihalamaka, who as a linebacker is kind of a Mike, but with his size and his frame, he's a guy that could play on the edge. He's a guy that can do some different things. Like his body type's not a whole lot different than what Dalen Hayes' was, right? And even he has some of that versatility and flexibility. So love what Notre Dame is doing at linebacker. I want to talk, before I let you go, John, we're going to take advantage of getting you on the show tonight. We're going to talk to you a little bit about some of the other 2023 commits, because Notre Dame's defensive class is on an absolute tear right now. 2022 was excellent. You look at what Marcus Freeman has added since he got here, him and his staff. Their 2023 class so far is off to an even better start. Obviously, Drayk Bowen is a big one. They got a Don Schuler, who's a safety from New Jersey, top 200 caliber kid, really good football player. But the two defensive ends they had, Brennan Vernon, ranking varies. I don't really care about that right now. The kid's a good football player. Reminds me a lot of Khalid Kareem at the same age, just that big, still kind of growing into his body, his athleticism, and he's a little awkward like Khalid was at that age. But by the time his body kind of got caught up with, or his athleticism got caught up with his body, he was a monster. And then the other guy that I think has just really come on as a junior is Keon Keeley. And I think when you look at the kind of athlete that he is, and you look at the athletes they're getting in 2022, they also got Aiden Cabrera, Tyson Ford. I mean, Notre Dame is bringing in the kind of elite, in my opinion, front seven players that you need to be a championship caliber football team. I'm going to put you on a spot, John. Do you see that? And you don't have to say that just because you're on a Notre Dame show, but do you see that? Do you see these guys as being look, this is what we talk about here, John, right? When we talk about recruiting, this is it right here, right? Close the gap. Are these gap closers?
They are. I think with Bowen, we've talked so much about needing to do it locally for the perception nationally. With everyone else you're talking about, it's doing it nationally. Mm-hmm. To reinforce and counter and pair with what you've done locally now tonight, right? And I can take this whole time just talking about Keon Keeley. This is a premier top. It's early for us. We take things very slow in our rankings, but this is a top 25 overall, regardless of position kind of kid. And to say that this early is something that I don't say a lot. Mm-hmm. I'm sure everybody who is listening right now watched them play Arch Manning at Newman High School. Who was the defensive player that you didn't have to know anything about to say, hey, who's that guy? Where's he going? Mm-hmm. It was Keeley. So I think those are the building blocks you need on defense. But look, I think Notre Dame's been doing it on defense, and mm-hmm. It's no surprise to me that the bulk of this early foundation is strong on defense at these premium positions. We're talking pass rushers, we're talking secondary prospects, and we're talking linebackers who can do a little bit of everything. I mean, that's what you have to build. And again, reinforcing that early will have bigger ramifications later in the 2023 cycle. But I like the foundation of it. You mentioned the defensive ends offset one another, right? One is more of a 5-tech, maybe an interior end of a 3-4 kind of guy. Mm-hmm. And the other is a stand-up, get after the passer, the guy that you're forcing the offense to account for pre-snap, which opens the door for the other guy. So mm-hmm. I love what Notre Dame's doing at this stage. And again, winning national battles. I mean, Keon Keeley is a Tampa kid who has had every college strolling on by the school over the last several years or since things opened back up. And he picked Notre Dame. I think that says a lot about him as a kid. but also it says a lot about what Notre Dame's able to withstand. And when you want to close the gap, you have to win those head-to-head battles with, for Keeley, with Florida, who's, an hour and a half up the road on I-75, with Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State, programs that have conventionally gone wherever they wanted for top prospects. You have to continue to show that you can do the same. And particularly on defense, I think Notre Dame has absolutely done that. We still want to see a little bit more on offense, but I think some guys, and we've talked about it here, some of these 2022 recruits are starting to close that gap. But on defense, I think that gap might already be closed. I think we're right there if we're talking about Notre Dame today versus where they're going.
And that obviously is going to say you have to now go develop those kids, right? I mean, that's always the key, but that hasn't been Notre Dame's problem. I mean, that development has not been Notre Dame's problem. It's can you get the truly elite difference makers, and when you get them here, that obviously they more often than not they turn them into those guys. And I think that's the big thing for me. You talk about it's not just that you got Keon Keeley, it's that you went to Berkeley Prep and beat Florida and Florida State in the SEC for him. It's not that Brennan Vernon's just that you got Brennan Vernon. It's that you went into Mentor, which is a Ohio State feeding ground. If they want a kid from Mentor, and they wanted him. There's no, they didn't really want him, which Ohio State fans say after the fact. But no, they wanted Brennan Vernon. Those are the kind of battles you have to win. And for a long time, John, look, you've been covering recruiting for a long time. For a long time, those are the battles that Notre Dame wasn't willing to even fight. And now they are. The Drayk Bowen, that obviously is one they would have done. But you can't just be Drayk Bowen. It has to be Drayk Bowen plus these other guys. And that's the biggest difference in my opinion, between the staff of Marcus Freeman, Mike Mickens, and Mike Elston is they're at the point now where they're like, I don't care who's offered you. I don't care where you're from. We're Notre Dame, right? I mean, that's big because you have to, if you don't fight those battles, you're never going to win them, obviously.
Correct. And again, we talk about perception so much with you and in recruiting in general. You're right. Notre Dame wasn't involved with these kids, maybe even 5 years ago with a lot of these kids. If there wasn't a certain tie to Notre Dame or, maybe the fit wasn't, hey, he's a high academic kid. So, okay, Notre Dame now has a chance because he's a high academic kid. Like, no, you have to go through the full spectrum and kind of give the kid the benefit of the doubt. And we're not seeing a lot of that with Notre Dame. It's totally wide open. It's go get the best football players who also then can start to fit or is on the trajectory to fit what we want as a program at Notre Dame. And again, going national, going down to Tampa is so big because we don't see it a ton, right? We don't see it a ton. So I reemphasize the point from earlier. You do it this early and it makes something happen because every time Keon Keeley's making a tackle, sacking Arch Manning, they're like, the Notre Dame commitment,
right?
And you're like, oh, he's committed to Notre Dame. This is a Tampa school, okay,
right?
Yeah, and those things really do have bigger ramifications because again, these kids know each other earlier than they ever have. They build relationships with each other earlier than they ever have, and they can help land recruits at any point in the process. How many? I mean, just go on Twitter, right? It's November, so it's flip season with the 2022 class. How many commits to the school that's going to get the flip? How many of those kids are just tipping it off on Twitter? I mean, it's like, I don't even need to hit my college contacts. Let me just hit this 17-year-old. Who knows what's going to happen a week from now? Right. It's not always the case, but these kids know the game. They know what's happening, and they're getting themselves involved sooner and sooner. So, again, Notre Dame on defense, you won't see any complaints from me. I think that the Irish are right in the thick of it with the best in the country.
And that's how you can go into Georgia and battle them for Caleb Downs. It's how you can go into Alabama and try to battle them for A.J. Harris. It's why you can go down to Dallas and try to battle everyone for Malik Muhammad and feel like you're in the game, is because you're starting to build that pipeline. And, John, here's the other thing. One of the things I love about what you do at SI American, and you know my stance on star rankings, but the reality is players look at that stuff. Right.
Sure.
And you now have Drayk Bowen, who is a composite 5-star recruit. You have Brennan Vernon, who's a composite 5-star recruit. And there's another network that just released the top 100. They had Keon Keeley as a number 5 player in the country. I know I'll be battling when we have our conversations about the SI All-American rankings. I'll be talking about Keon Keeley being, as you mentioned, a top 25 player. that's a lot of people say, well, Notre Dame gets really good players. They don't get the elite players. 2022, can't say that. Or 2023 class, you can't say that because you've got now 3 guys that are borderline top 30 recruits on the front 7. Don't tell me that Malik Muhammad and Caleb Downs and AJ Harris aren't like, Justin Rhett aren't like, you guys seeing what, like, as you mentioned, they're watching the ESPNU game with Bishop Newman and Berkeley Prep, and they're like, I wouldn't mind playing behind that dude, right?
Yeah.
Because, hey, Arch ain't picking me apart if he's laying on his back the whole game, right? It's huge. It's huge. And now you add Drayk Bowen to the mix, and now they can push for Sonny Styles because, as you mentioned, guys that know each other well, that's 2 guys that know each other very well. And if you can now add Sonny Styles, again, they still got to beat Ohio State for him, right? It's not over yet, clearly. That's another top 25 caliber player. Don't tell me that Notre Dame can't recruit the top players in the country because Marcus Freeman has taken that myth and just like destroyed it, tore it into pieces, flushed it down the toilet, and said, that's a work ethic problem, not a Notre Dame can't do it problem.
There's only 2 schools in this 2022 class, so the senior class, that have more SI99 kids on board right now than Notre Dame. It's Alabama with 9 and Clemson with 8. You know who has 6? Notre Dame. You know who else has 6? Georgia, right? You know who else has 6? Ohio State. Like look at the teams we're talking about here. I mean, these are the year in, year out winners, and we're not talking about LSU. We're not talking about Florida State, Florida. And these are all teams that Notre Dame, Michigan, that Notre Dame has rolled by on the recruiting trail. And it's tangible. And the numbers were similar last year, by the way. So these are tangible gains, gaps being closed. And Notre Dame is literally in that bubble with all the elite when it comes to the best 99 players in the country. It's Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Georgia. Those are the teams with 6 or more. That's it. Not Oregon, not USC, Texas. It's just that small group. So as that continues and that trend continues, we'll start talking about that with prospects sooner and sooner. You see a kid who's a sophomore, who's a star, a couple years ago, we're like, oh, that's a Bama, Georgia, or Ohio State kid. And then Clemson started getting in that conversation. Is Notre Dame the next school on that list that we start to just almost thrust upon the kid when we're just trying to sell what kind of recruit he's going to be? Notre Dame's numbers are there right now. So if all this continues in 2023, like you said, off to a hell of a start, then Notre Dame's going to be that 5th school that we throw into there. Like to emphasize, this is a national recruit, not just a regional one.
Got a couple super chats here. Octavia Roca. We answered that question, Octavia. He can play Mike Will. I know they've talked to him about possibly playing Rover, but I think he's an inside guy, can move around. Is he great sideline to sideline? I'll address this one real quick, John. There's really no such thing outside of the rare players as a true sideline to sideline player. No Will is going to make a tackle on a bubble screen to the far side, and
not if you're a good defense,
right? So it's more what the phrase I use is, can he play to the sideline? And to me, that is what Drayk is. He doesn't need someone to funnel people back to him. He's a guy that can literally play to the sideline. You're not going to outrun him to the sideline. And so, yes, athletically, he is a great rangy downhill player that can cover a lot of ground. No question about it.
Did I hear him comp himself as a hybrid between Bobby Wagner and Luke Kuechly?
Yes, he did. Which is why I hate why they asked that question. I love that he said it.
I know. I can tell you why they asked the question, because it's required. But
it's true. You would know.
You talk about him being ready for that question. He gave you two linebacker legends, really, right? Yeah. Bobby Wagner will be in the Hall of Fame. Luke Kuechly will be a first ballot. I mean, wow. I mean, my goodness. I mean, that's
another Midwestern kid. Yep, obviously from Cincinnati. Ronnie Chicharla, thanks for – hey, Ronnie, it's been a while since we've seen you, buddy. Glad you're feeling better. Glad you're with us. Much love, bros. Much love to you, Ronnie. Thank you very much. We had a super chat here from It Is Written. I don't know if that's a Nas reference or something else, but love it. Also, do you know how to say his – I always call him Junior. Do you know how to say his first name? Yeah, do you know how to say his first name? I can say Tuyalamaka, but I've never said his first name because I always call him Junior.
I would go with Niuafe, but
Okay,
that's
there you
just
go.
me making it a Spanish.
There you
Hey,
go.
look, when Tua was coming out, I was like, Tua, as a person who speaks Spanish, I would say Tagovailoa, and he goes,
Yeah.
"You're so close." He goes, "You're missing an N sound." I'm like, "There's
Yes.
no N," and he's like,
Yes.
"Yeah, well, then it's pronounced tongue." I'm like, "Okay," and then
Yes.
boom, you go with it. So I
I
would
had to
go
learn that when his cousin was being recruited by Notre Dame. It's like
right.
Tungavaloa, and I'm like, okay, I don't
Right.
see a G in there, but it's
I'd
cool.
go
Or an N, yeah.
Niuafe, but
Okay.
I think I'm missing one element there.
And he said he is a beast, in my opinion. I agree. He is also, I think, the thing I like about Junior is he's a tremendous complement to the other type. So, like when you're watching that Wisconsin game, I kept thinking to myself, man, this is the kind of game you recruit Junior to Alabama to play. There's no question about it. And there's going to be some more coming up here. Paul Mercer says, what's the saying? Defense wins games, but offense wins championships. What's the outlook on offensive commits for next year and 2023? Let me just tell you something, Paul. At Irish Breakdown, we will say that's an old phrase. I think in the last 5 years, we have learned that defense will get you to the show, but now offense wins championships. And that's an area where Notre Dame has to get better. And I think that, to me, John, is the final piece. Because when you look at Notre Dame in like 2020 and 2021, elite offensive classes that we're seeing pay off now. We're seeing Tyler Buckner and Chris Tyree and Michael Mayer and Lorenzo Stiles and Deion Colsey and a really good freshman and sophomore group that they've had to even steal from to go help out on defense when they've had some issues. We're seeing what Logan Diggs can do. They've had 2 freshmen that already start on the offensive line this year, but the defensive classes were lacking. 2022 is the first time I feel like if they can get Billy Schrauth, they're a quarterback away from having just really outstanding on both sides. Obviously, I love Jadarian Price. CJ Williams and Tobias Merriweather are both top 100 recruits on SI 99. Tobias is ranked higher by SI 99 than anyone else. He's ranked number 46. Elite special player, 2 outstanding tight ends, in a good offensive line class right now. And I think with the senior year that Ty Chan is having is making that better. They've got to get Billy Schrauth. Quarterback's not where I would like it to be. Steve Angeli's a nice player, but he's more of a depth guy. 2023 is going to be the interesting one. Can they put back-to-back strong classes on both sides? That's the question. Cedric Irvin's a nice player. He's not an elite player. Cooper Flanagan's a really good tight end. He's just kind of building on what you already have. That's going to be the thing. And I think for me to answer this question, we've talked about, Drayk Bowen and Keon Keeley being kind of the Pied Pipers. The guy that has to be that for Notre Dame in 2023 is Dante Moore. That's the must-get player.
Who's the headlining offensive recruit? That's got to be him.
He's the guy. You get him, and he starts playing the flute, and all the other top recruits on offense and defense start saying, okay, now Notre Dame's really for real because they got that kind of guy. So, look, the offensive class is nice. I really like the Cedric Irvin pickup, but he's a complementary player to what you already have, in my opinion. John, you've seen him live. What were your thoughts on Cedric?
Yeah, I think he's a change of pace to the style we've seen at Notre Dame. Is he to be a Kyron Williams bell cow? No, he's more in the Chris Tyree mold as a change of pace, a complementary piece who can help you in the running game or the passing game down the line. So there's value there. He's a tough kid. He's a kid who as a 4-year varsity starter in Miami, that's just not easy to do. We all know about the bloodlines there as well. So he's a mature kid who's going to do his job, but I don't think he will be a Heisman candidate down the line or a first team All-American like we've seen with Kyron Williams in terms of what he might become. So I think you do need to pair him with somebody, but I'm with you. I'm focused on quarterback for Notre Dame. There's kind of a transition going on right now, right? I mean, we expect some kind of attrition, right? I mean, I heard a Drew Pine rumor today, for that matter. There's going to be attrition. That quarterback room is going to turn over a little bit. Jack Cohn's not a young pup anymore. What does Buckner's future look like? There's going to be some movement there. You need to solidify that beyond 2022, beyond Steve Angeli. And I think you have to hit one of these elite guys in 2023. And the good news for Notre Dame and really everybody else is that it is a wide open year at the position, and it is a deep year at the quarterback position. The top 7 or 8 guys in 2023 would blow the 2022 guys out of the water. And that includes those guys who skipped a year. That would include a Quinn Ewers in that conversation. I think 2023 at quarterback is going to be one of those years where everybody looks back at, kind of like we did with the Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields class, and some of these that pair up and they almost build on each other. That's going to be recruiting at the quarterback position next cycle. And Notre Dame's already locked in on its top target. So I think that has to be where we see true progress from Notre Dame recruiting.
And Paul actually got it right. I read his thing wrong. I think I'm developing dyslexia. Paul got it right. Defense wins games, but offense wins championships. He nailed that. So Paul's been listening. Paul, you are my dude. I'm sorry I read that wrong the first way, but he's absolutely right. And it starts at quarterback. And they need Tyler Buchner to pan out, and they need to follow him up with another. Because even if Tyler Buchner's as good as we think he is, it's not a guarantee he's here past 2023, 2024. So you need to follow up with that next elite class. And John, you're right. And we're still learning that there's some 2023 kids we didn't know about 6 months ago that are looking like it. The kid that they just offered from Alabama is an example of, I didn't know about this kid 3 months ago. This is a dude, right? It is an outstanding class. I think Dante Moore, to me, the reason I like him is, number one, I think he's a special player. Number two, I love the fact that he's a local type of kid. Detroit's just a couple hours away.
Sure.
And I think he is an established name in that, okay, great talent. I think he's a really, you've talked to him, very smart, mature kid beyond what you'd expect of a 2023 kid who's just a junior. But kids, you just see kids around him and you're like, okay, that's the kind of guy that kids want to go play with. And you have to get that. Because I don't think Tyler Buchner was that kind of guy. Tyler was kind of a quiet,
Yep.
He just wasn't that. He was a great talent, but he wasn't that guy that he walks in the room and kids just kind of gravitate to him as a recruit. Now, I'm not saying he's not that way at Notre Dame. I'm just talking about as a recruit because that's what we're talking about here. So, yeah, Dante Moore is that guy. And, I think you get him and all of a sudden the 2023 stat class starts taking care of itself. But that's why the 2021 and 22 classes are so important, because now if you're Notre Dame, you can say, hey, look what we already have here for you. Look at Lorenzo, look at Dion, look at Tyree, look at Logan Diggs, look at Tobias Merriweather, look at CJ Williams, look at the tight ends that we're recruiting. Hey man, this is where you want to be.
I agree. That's a great comment you made about the gravitational pull. That's what we talk about with elite classes. Look at any number one class. They've got a quarterback who just kind of brings guys with him, kind of gets guys over the hump. And Notre Dame should be able to do that if they can lock in a kid like Dante for sure. A kid who helps you nationally with top targets. And like you said, the offense is where we need to see improvement from Notre Dame. But, man, I love a lot of these pass catcher, game breaker types that ND has coming in on the outside. CJ Williams is just going to be Mr. Reliable. You can see it already, right? 3rd and 6. Bang route at the sticks, catch it, get a foot down, out of bounds. He's had a
CJ great senior year too, and doing just exactly those type of things.
And then with Tobias, the complete opposite, right? Take the top off of your secondary and really widen things out for the position we always know Notre Dame's going to have, which is the tight end spot. So if you've got your stellar, polished receiver on one side, your game breaker on the other side, and some big guys in the middle who can navigate, you're off to the races in terms of skill position. So love what this class is doing offensively on the outside. And that's, again, that's another gap closing type of run that we need to see consistently from Brian Kelly and company.
And I'm not going to lie. I don't think it hurts Notre Dame to have with Jaylen Brown to have a teammate of his in the class as well. Cause he's one of because I also think it's a pretty good receiver class from sort of here's the strengths of 2023 so far, what I've seen, John, and you've watched a lot more. Quarterback, wide receiver, linebacker, secondary. For me so far, now I haven't dove into the defensive line class as much. I've seen the kids Notre Dame has, but secondary, and so far Notre Dame seems to be pushing for top guys. Jaylen Brown would obviously be another one of those names to know. And then Cardinal Tate, no matter where he might be leaning now, a lot of people think it's Ohio State. You get Dante Moore, I don't care if he's committed to Ohio State or not, Notre Dame's still going to be a player in that one.
Yeah, and I think him pushing things back is probably good news for Notre Dame. Remember, he was supposed to be off the board by now. He was talking about committing in October. being a done deal. And most of us feel like if that was the case, it would have been Ohio State. So
Mm-hmm.
the longer Carnell pushes things back, the better. I think he's dealing with an injury right now, a little bit banged up. So I think he's going to focus on that, help IMG win a couple more games, and then see where his recruitment is. So this last stretch for Notre Dame on the field, I think, important to a guy like that as well. You can't discount that in terms of trying to help win a recruiting battle, especially against a program like Ohio State. But yeah, I think the 2022 D-line class is so good that 23 is no matter how good it's going to be, it's not going to feel the same way.
And you're talking about nationally, just so
nationally on the D-line,
right?
Yeah, not Notre Dame's group.
Yeah.
I think nationally, the 2022 defensive line group, inside and out, really, really great. Maybe the best position group on the field nationally. So,
which is why guys like Tyson Ford and Aiden Gabera, in my opinion, are being overlooked a little bit, is because it's such a great. I mean, we had that debate when we were doing the rankings. Is like, okay, where do we put Tyson Ford? Because you know what I mean. It's like, where do you fit him? But John, I want to wrap up here with sort of a what's next for Notre Dame in the 2023 class. We've kind of talked about some of the bigger picture things. I want to talk a little bit about the front seven recruiting when it comes to the what's next. The obvious one, and real quick, Sean Swain with a super chat. Thank you, Sean. Brian, CBS Sports didn't cut from poker here. Wouldn't have seen it if it wasn't for you guys. Your work is always elite. Thank you for all you do. Thank you, Sean, for being a part of what we're doing here and for the super chat. I appreciate it very much. It is written, says, where should Freeman go from here? Who is the next target? Well, the most obvious one is Sonny Styles. And it's going to be Notre Dame or Ohio State. I don't think that Lorenzo getting so much burn lately and making plays hurts Notre Dame. But at the end of the day, Sonny's going to make, and his family's going to allow him to make the decision that's best for him. But that is the clear, not debatable second level target for Notre Dame.
I think top overall target. I mean, I think the quarterback stuff is going to figure itself out.
Yeah, and quarterback's a completely different
it's,
animal.
It's like its own department, right? I mean, that's like Tommy Rees locked in a dungeon. So just let him do that, and everyone else is focused on these guys. So that everyone else group, it's all about Styles. You mentioned the family. I mean, this kid it's like down the middle, right? I mean, there's connections everywhere, left and right. Familiar with both schools, been to both schools a bunch. So it's about the little things, the little data points, and the most active and current data points he's going to get are from Big Bro because he's there right now. So I think that's another one where the longer it plays out, probably the better for Notre Dame. And look, does the Styles recruitment and heck, the Dante Moore recruitment for that matter, do they both blow right by the coaching carousel? Do they both extend into early 2022? I think some 2023 kids are going to start to think about that if they're closing in on a decision, because a lot of these assistant coaches and head coaches for that matter are going to change hands. This is the craziest head coaching carousel we may ever see, and there are more big jobs to come. But if you would have told me that 6 months ago that USC, LSU, TCU are going to be open before we get to November 1, and then Miami, Penn State, and so many others could open, I would have been like, what happened? Like, what happened in college football? So there's going to be a lot of movement everywhere. Every conference, every school is going to be affected. So I think a lot of these younger recruits are going to allow some of that dust to settle for sure.
I have a sneaky feeling that Sonny won't be on the board as long as some people think.
Okay.
I just kind of get that sense, but I think with a lot of these guys, we're at least going to see them get into the winter to get through, because it's really about it's the second signing day, right? Because everyone's going to have their staffs in place by the second signing day. And that's when you can kind of find out who's going to be where, and then you can start planning your visits. But yeah, Sonny Styles is the target. There's an interesting guy. You talk about somebody, guys that don't have a position. You on Friday night went and saw a young man, and we had an update on our message board and then on our website from an interview that you did on Samuel Mpemba, who is he doesn't even have a position. He's just an athlete, right? Who's at IMG Academy, visited Notre Dame for the Cincinnati game and talked with you about kind of what's next. He mentioned visiting Oklahoma and Alabama, which we all expected. Then he said he wanted to get back to Notre Dame again.
Yeah.
I could tell by listening to your voice, because you sent me your audio recording, that you were a little surprised by that. John, talk to me about where you think Notre Dame stands. You got a chance to interview Samuel. I was surprised at how you could just hear when he starts talking about Notre Dame. We've done this a long time. You can read kids. Like a kid kind of gets like, ooh, okay, you asked me about somebody I like. That's the vibe I got, John, just listening. What did you get being there talking to him?
So what we said about Styles and Moore, flip it for Samuel and Pemba. The sooner the better if you're a Notre Dame fan, because he's already been, he's already familiar, and he wants to go back after seeing Oklahoma and Alabama, which are still TBD. I think he's going to try to make those visits this month. IMG only plays 2 more games, so by next Friday they're kind of done. So I think a lot of their kids are going to really break out and wrap up some 2021 fall game visits. So he does want to make those 2 trips before he commits, but he also wants to get back to Notre Dame. And that's when my voice changed in the interview. I'm like, okay, but you've never been to the other 2. You've already been to Notre Dame. So we're going back here. And he's like, yeah, I just need to, cross some T's and dot some I's. So the ball is in Notre Dame's court for my virtual money. I think he wants to make a decision soon. I mean, he sent the tweet out and everybody thought it was going to be very soon. He said that might still happen, but he does want to take some trips. But all these schools want him to play defense in some capacity, rush the passer in some capacity, and he has bought into that, which I think is really important, because a lot of these two-way guys, these athletes, want to play the position that colleges don't want them to play, right? The most common is an athletic quarterback who schools want to project that receiver or DB, and he's like, no, I'm a quarterback. So you see a lot of recruiting contention with that. Sam isn't one of those kids. He wants to play where he thinks the ceiling is, and he kind of knows now that it's on defense. And when you talk about Notre Dame, he's talking about a position projection. Elsewhere, he's like, yeah, they want me on defense. At Notre Dame, he's like, it's Viper, it's this, it's that, Marcus Freeman. It's like, it's so narrow.
They have shown him exactly how he fits in at all the different spots in that defense. So it's not just like, hey, man, we'll get you here and we'll find. No, they've said, hey, here's why your versatility fits so well in what we do. He did say too, John, I believe, he said he'd like to have a decision before December, but he's not locked into it. He says, I think he said, if things go as planned, basically, he'd like to have something by December. So Notre Dame needs to, turn up the heat on him, because he's another guy that's going to be a top 50 national recruit at a big time program from IMG, also from St. Louis. And that's why getting Tyson Ford is huge. Getting Gabriel Rubio is huge. The success Kyron Williams is having out of St. Louis is huge, because St. Louis is one of those ascending areas where you're starting to see more and more. It's like Atlanta was 10 years ago, and Charlotte is starting to become, and we're seeing that St. Louis too. It's always produced players, but it's starting to produce more big time players. And that would be just another one that you talk about, sort of the what's next. If they're able to get Samuel and Pemba against Bama, Oklahoma, and everyone else in the country, that would be another one. But there's still work to be done. I think there's definitely still work to be done, because we don't know how he's going to feel once he gets back from the Bama, Oklahoma visits. That's going to be the big
especially if he's taking November visits, right? I mean, you think of some of the November rivalry weekend starts creeping in there. It makes you wonder which games he's going to visit. But impressive kid to talk to him. My goodness, he's talking about an impressive frame. I mean, this is every bit of. I'm interviewing him like this. It's like 6'5", 6'6". 230, but there's so much room to fill out, so much length. IMG plays him at tight end, because they're like, hey, we've got a lot of guys at every position who kind of know what they're doing. Just be an outlet for the quarterback. And he caught a big 2-minute drill pass and what was a really tight IMG win. So just a supreme athlete who I think's, you talk about his best football ahead. I mean, he might be well ahead with Sam, but everybody understands that. That's why it's such a national recruitment and an important one for Notre Dame to win. But again, talking about the Irish on defense, that 23 class is going to be – it's shaping up to be something real special on that side of the ball.
I think Notre Dame fans are hoping that his visit to Alabama is on November 13th. Be in town for that New Mexico State game. That'd be a good weekend to be there. I think that's the one you're kind of hoping his schedule works out to where he's got to be there on the 13th. So, John, I think we got a couple more super chats here. Appreciate everybody being a part of that. Eric T, Notre Dame wins a national championship in the next 2 to 3 years. Thoughts? It's possible. I mean, we'll certainly have plenty of chance to get to that. But I think these next two classes are going to play a big role in that. Number one, landing them. Number two, developing them. But they're starting to recruit at that level. And it really began in 2020 on offense. That was the Tyree class with Michael Mayer, Tosh Baker. Then 2021, you add the current freshman class, which is really, really good. And then, of course, you're bringing in another group. That's what the great teams do, though, right, John? It's not that you just have that one great class. It's that you start stacking them on top of each other year after year. So when a Jordan Johnson doesn't pan out, you're following up the next year with Deion Colsey and Lorenzo Styles, and then you're following up the next year with Tobias Merriweather and C.J. Williams. That's what Notre Dame had missed for so many years, was that stacking up that they're starting to do, and now we're seeing it on defense. Because for as great as Clark Lee was as a coach, he's not a strong recruiter. And Notre Dame had some years where they'd get a good kid here and a good kid there, but they weren't really stacking up the elite classes. Marcus Freeman has changed that in a hurry since he got here.
Yeah, you think of Notre Dame in the last decade, you think of individual players at a position, not so much position units outside of maybe the offensive line and the tight end room. You think of individual players. So I think that's when you think of the teams that are winning national titles, you can go to positional units, right? You can go to Ohio State's running back room. You can go to Alabama's, obviously, receiver room. Unfortunate news with that group yesterday, my goodness. But you can think of position groups without a whole lot of thought process.
Right.
At Notre Dame, it's like individual guys,
right?
Especially on defense. So
right.
I think
like
that's
linebacker.
Really
there's been one team in the country that's had 3 Buckus winners in the last 10 years. It's Notre Dame. Manti, Jalen, but they haven't consistently. It's just been like you said. Jalen was playing next to Joe Schmidt, right? Like
they're
Jeremiah
never together.
Right. Jeremiah was playing with Drew White, and Osmar, good players, but not like Alabama's got 3 dudes playing next to each other, right? That's the key. Is okay. Yes, you got your Jalen Smith, you got your Manti Te'o. Manti was playing next to Dan Fox. He should have been playing next to Luke Kuechly. I'm still ticked about that. He wanted to come to Notre Dame, but Notre Dame's coaching staff at the time, this is pre-Brian Kelly, was like, nah, we like Dan Fox better. Thank you, John Tenuta, for that one.
Yeah, so he's like, I'll go to the other Catholic school. I'll go east.
Exactly, and have 190 tackles a year. So real smart there, move there. God's Thumbs 222. Hey, Coach, Paul Mercer was saying what you said. I got it. Definitely saw that. He said defense wins games, but wanted to know what's the word on offense to get to a championship. I appreciate you clearing that up. I did see a couple people point that out, so I went back and looked at Paul's comment and was like, oh, I got that wrong. So I appreciate you pointing that out, Paul. I got a chance to meet Paul at our recent tailgate, so Paul's a good dude, and he got it right. So I appreciate that very, very, very much, and I appreciate your super chat as well. I got a couple more here, I believe, and then we will wrap things up. Again, thanks to everybody for being with us tonight. Travis Singleton, does defensive depth make it easier to run an up-tempo offense? Seems like Coach Freeman can just rotate 5 stars even if our offense keeps scoring in a hurry. John, 100%. 100%. Because you don't have to protect your defense when Coach Freeman can say, hey, we're good. I can throw my second team in there at linebacker and we're going to be fine. That's a very important point, Travis, because right now the depth at Notre Dame, partly because of some injuries, they're not at the point yet where this is the most depth Notre Dame's had on defense in a long time, but it's still not the same kind of depth that Alabama's throwing out there, that Georgia's throwing out there. The way they're recruiting in 22 and now hopefully continue to do in 23, yeah, you can do that because you can recruit Jalen Sneed, Josh Burnham, Nolan Ziegler, Junior Tuihalamaka 1 year, and then if you can land Sonny Styles to go with Drayk Bowen the next year. Oh, and by the way, we've already kind of forgotten about Prince Collie the year before. You're good. You're good to go there. And same thing, defensive line, because you talk about position groups. One of the most underrated position groups from Notre Dame in the last 3 years is defensive line. Notre Dame, their 2018 defensive line, for example, had 5 defensive ends from that rotation that played that are now in the NFL. 4 got drafted, and they had Jerry Tillery, who was a first-round draft pick, a D tackle. But Dalen Hayes was the only of those guys who was really a top recruit. Jerry Tillery was recruited as an offensive lineman. Mm-hmm. Harry Heastan recruited him to Notre Dame. Khalid Kareem was like a top 200 to 250 guy. Julian Aguirre was like a top 250 kind of guy. Adi Tagumba Ogundeji, they flipped from Western Michigan, right? So what you're seeing now is, really good by Coach Gilmore on that one. But what we're seeing now is Mike Elston still bringing in the same type of player that he wants, long, athletic, rangy, but now he's getting a higher ceiling version of that with a higher floor version. That's the difference. The ceiling for Tyson Ford may be a little higher than Adi Ogundeji or Khalid Kareem, but what I definitely believe is the floor is higher. And I think that's important because if you can improve your sort of bust factor, because when you bring in those 215-pound kids you think you can develop, you're going to miss on more of those because you just don't know how they're going to project. I think that's been the big thing too, is they're starting that, and that tradition is now what's leading to them getting the Tyson Fords, the Aiden Gaberas, the Keon Keeleys, and the Brennan Vernons. And so to your point, John, is if you can start now bringing in those classes back to back, linebacker, defensive back, that's huge. And then that makes it much easier to convince the AJ Harrises, the Malik Muhammads, the Justin Retts, the Caleb Downs, the Xavier Nwankpas to say, hey, I think you might want to be playing behind this group. And that's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, and I like this question from Travis. It's really smart. When you're running another type of offense, you want more depth to get in there. But the key is you have to have the athletes to keep it simple. Because if you're teaching 11 guys a defense, we can get complex, right? We got a couple 20-year-olds in here, maybe a couple 21-year-olds. We can start getting into reading differently and all that. Maybe some ghost calls, disguising, all that stuff. When you're talking about rotating in freshmen, 18 and 19-year-olds, you need to simplify. But they need to be athletic enough to where that simple defense is still very effective because you just can't out-athlete Notre Dame like maybe you could back in the day. So, yes, it is easier to rotate guys in, but it also helps you simplify that defense so younger guys can see the field sooner, which in turn, of course, helps recruiting that much more.
I think it allows you to be more aggressive too. You don't necessarily have to you worry about saving legs, or you can just go play man coverage. You can attack, you can blitz, you can ask your linebackers to maybe do a little bit more because I've got this next guy that I can bring in every third series to give those guys a breather. So I certainly think that's a huge – I'm still not a huge fan of rotating the DBs as much. I think, John, you were a corner. I'm going to bring this up to ask you. I feel like as a DB, it's better to stay on as much because you have to learn, okay, this is what this guy does. This is his move. This is his setup. And you need that. You can watch film all you want, but it's not until you play a guy and you see how his hips move and all those kind of things. So that is still the one position I don't – a corner more so than safety. Corner is still the one position I don't love really rotating a lot. If I can avoid it, maybe get a third corner playing some nickel and those type of things. But if I can get my corners out there every snap, I'd rather do that more often than not. What's your thoughts on that since you played corner?
100%, Brian. You want to get those sub defenders in and out, and maybe when the sub guy comes in, your outside corner moves around if he's more comfortable in another position, with that group and that look, that's totally fine. But I agree with you. That's a rhythm position at corner, especially now when you're playing a lot more zone, I feel like, because quarterbacks are getting more athletic and these offenses are obviously getting wider. You're playing spread looks every single week. Even with the power running teams, it's like a power running spread. So you're doing a lot of reading. It's a lot of eye work and a lot of reading your keys. So you need those reps. So that you're good to go by the time it's third down or by the time it's crunch time and you need to get off the field. So I'm with you. Those corners and your play calling safety should probably stay on the field 99% of the time, but it doesn't mean they have to stay in the same spot when other guys come in based on down and distance.
Matt Baisley with the final super chat. Thanks for the show, y'all. You are welcome, Matt. I enjoyed it. And then we got some love down here for you, John. I just wanted to show you real quick. Jojo Pineda says, awesome show, guys. Thanks, Coach G, for having Mr. Garcia. Amazing knowledge and in-depth from both you guys. Thumbs up. You're Mr. Garcia now. So wow. I'm digging that. Matt D, thanks for coming on the show, Mr. Garcia. Great show, Brian. I'm just Brian, right? And Coach D, like you're Mr. Garcia. So
because I got a polo on, maybe. I got the polo.
I'm rocking the Gap closer shirt, and you're all professional. You got the Sports Illustrated on the back. I understand, man. I understand. That's why I had to bring in the big guns for this five. This is a big time commitment. So I had to bring in the big guns, and I don't have a gun bigger than John. So John, thank you so much for being a part of the show today, buddy. Appreciate you spending an hour with us going over this commitment. But that's how big this one is. So John, before you leave, let everybody know where they can find your work, obviously on social, but then also the Sports Illustrated website.
Yeah, absolutely. Social is just John Garcia _ JR. And yeah, si.com/college. We've got college football, college basketball recruiting for you. It's all free. And this is the time of year where it all overlaps, right? We're talking signing day. We're talking the end of college football season, how the carousel impacts things. Hoops is going to get started here soon. So just check us out, si.com/college.
All right. So, and then Matt D says, I'm old school. He doesn't know me. So he's showing just respect there. So anyway, everybody, thanks for being a part of what we did today. Thanks for a great audience tonight. Obviously, big commitment for Notre Dame. Obviously, getting a player like Drayk Bowen, elite prospect, big-time prospect, really, really needle-moving, gap-closing kind of deal. But this is also one that we believe is going to start setting it up to now finish and add that next great player. So we'll have obviously more at irishbreakdown.com. You can get our articles. I have my class impact article up, my commitment story up. We'll talk more about it on the boards. If you haven't signed up, boards.irishbreakdown.com. Check that out. Sign up for that. So for John Garcia Jr., I'm Brian Driscoll. Thanks everybody so much for joining us. Have a great night, and we will talk to you again tomorrow when we do our Navy preview and prediction. Have a good night, everybody.